Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the misty fields of medieval France, where war drums throb in the distance, and a barefoot teenage girl is about to be handed the fate of a kingdom. You're standing in the shade of a pear tree. It's quiet except for birdsong, and then something otherworldly, a shimmer in the air, a warmth in your chest, and the certainty that you've just heard voices not meant for mortal ears. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and what time it is where you're watching from. Always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts in Domremy, a tiny village in northeastern France. You're just a farmer's kid, probably helping herd sheep or fetch water from the stream. It's the early 15th century, and France is a mess. The 100 Years' War has turned your country into a patchwork of burned fields, broken towns, and finger-pointing nobles. People say the English are devils, the Burgundians traitors, and your king. Nobody's even sure if he's the real deal. You're 13. You barely know what's beyond the next hill. And yet one afternoon, as you're standing quietly in your family's garden, a golden light floods the space around you. You blink, time warps, and then you hear it, clearer than church bells, a voice, kind but commanding, followed by a vision of Saint Michael, flanked by Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret, radiating glory like human suns. They tell you, of all people, that God has chosen you to save France. Naturally, your first reaction is, excuse me? But the visions return, again and again. For years, they never yell. They don't argue. They just insist. This is the part historians agree on. Joan of Arc claimed to receive divine visions starting around age 13. That alone would be spooky enough for dinner gossip. But she didn't keep them secret. She told people. She started planning. And when she was around 16 or 17, she did something totally bonkers. She set out to find a royal court she'd never seen, convinced them she was legit, and offered to command their armies. Not just be part of the army, lead it. At 17, with zero military experience, while being a peasant girl in the 1400s, the odds here are, frankly, plot of a YA fantasy novel levels of absurd. Now, here's a quirky tidbit that rarely makes it into textbooks. People say Joan once wept because the saints didn't tell her exactly how to save France. No detailed strategy, no tactical maps, just vibes and faith. Can you imagine being told to go fix a 100-year-old war with no instructions, and only a celestial group chat to guide you? Still, Joan doesn't fold. She cuts her hair short, wears men's clothes for protection and practicality. Some locals whisper that it's witchcraft. Others just want her to stay quiet and churn butter. But Joan, you are locked in. You know what you saw. You know what you heard. So, like someone packing for Comic-Con, but with 500% more fire and steel, you march off toward Vaucouleurs, the nearest garrison town loyal to the Dauphin, Charles VII. You need his permission to travel to court, and you need an escort, and weapons. And oh, right, proof you're not insane. The captain there, Robert de Baudricourt, literally laughs in your face the first time, tells your cousin to take you home. This girl belongs with the spinning wheel, not the sword, he says. But then something happens. You predict a military defeat before it reaches the town. He's shaken. And more importantly, his men are listening now. Whether it's fear, faith, or political calculation, de Baudricourt finally says yes. And so, in February 1429, you ride out. A small group of soldiers escort you in secret across dangerous country. You wear men's armor. You sleep rough. And every time a twig snaps in the woods, you wonder if it's an English scout or something worse. Fun historical footnote. Joan was given a special black tunic and trousers sewn tightly to the skin, making it nearly impossible for her to be assaulted or stripped without a fight. Modern scholars still debate whether this was for safety, symbolism, or divine modesty. Some even argue it was a form of proto-feminist armor, though that's definitely a 21st century lens. You travel nearly 300 miles over 11 days. There are muddy roads, icy rivers, and you probably smell like wet goat by the time you reach Shinon, where the Dauphin waits. He's skeptical, of course. Everyone is. But word has spread. A girl claims to have been sent by God to save France. A teenage shepherd is about to walk into a palace, into a future nobody expects, and into the fires of history. You arrive at Shinon, muddy and exhausted, your armor dented, your cloak torn by brambles, but your purpose blazing hotter than the hearths in the castle walls. The Dauphin's palace isn't Versailles-level glamour yet. It's a drafty fortress more than a fairy tale court, but compared to your home in Domremy, it might as well be a space station. The nobles don't know what to make of you. You're short, sun-browned, and far too confident for someone who looks like she should be churning butter, or, at most, tending geese. But your eyes are steady. Your voice doesn't shake. You demand an audience with Charles VII, and, after some muttered counsels and plenty of side eyes, they decide to test you. Now, get this. Instead of meeting you directly, Charles sets up a little medieval prank. He hides in the crowd of nobles and dresses another man in royal robes to pose as the king. If you really have God on your side, they figure, you'll be able to spot the true Dauphin. You walk into the great hall, torches flickering along the stone walls, the air thick with the scent of boiled leather and old wine. Dozens of lords stand before you, but you don't hesitate. You walk straight up to a modestly dressed man halfway back in the crowd and kneel. That's him. That's the real Charles. He's stunned. Everyone is. No one's quite sure if it's divine guidance, sharp observation, or one of Joan's spies doing recon. But either way, it works. You're now impossible to dismiss. Here's a mainstream historical fact. This test really happened, and Joan passed it. Even skeptical clerics recorded it in their notes, though the exact details, like whether she knew in advance, remained fuzzy. Charles is cautious, but intrigued. He talks with you privately. You tell him about your visions. You speak with conviction, not just about God, but about France. You claim you will drive out the English and bring him to Reims to be crowned, fulfilling the ancient rite that makes a king truly legitimate. This matters because right now Charles is a maybe king. He's got the bloodline, but not the crown. And he certainly doesn't have control of Reims. But you say you'll change that. Of course, not everyone's on board. The clergy demand a theological investigation, you know, to make sure you're not a sorceress with a fancy haircut. So they haul you off to Poitiers, where for 3 weeks you're grilled by priests and professors, most of them old men who think girls who read are already suspicious, let alone girls who claim to hear voices from God. You hold your own. When they ask what language your saints speak, you fire back with better French than yours. Burn. When they ask why God would choose you of all people, you tell them he had no one better in your village. The sass is strong, and the fire in your eyes is stronger. Eventually, they admit they can't find any heresy in you. One report even says, "We have found no evil in her, only goodness, humility, and a woman of the church." Not bad for a peasant who's never even had a formal education. But that's not enough. You need a symbol. Something legendary. So you make a very specific request. A sword buried behind the altar in the chapel of St. Catherine at Fierbois. No one even knew it was there. But they dig. And there it is, 5 rusted crosses on the blade, just like you said. Now, this is one of those French tidbits that feels tailor-made for a Netflix series. Some believe the sword was never real, that it was planted to boost Joan's legend. Others think it was a relic from the Crusades, long forgotten. Either way, when it's found, people start whispering miracle. So now you've got royal backing, holy approval, and a literal church sword. Time to suit up. You get a white banner painted with a golden image of Christ and 2 angels, surrounded by the words Jesus Maria. You refuse to carry a weapon in battle. You'll wield that banner instead, like a glowing "Follow Me" sign above the chaos. You're also fitted with custom armor, silver-toned, lightweight, and yes, tailored for a teenage girl. This wasn't off-the-rack battlefield gear. It was forged for you. Scholars still argue whether this armor was purely symbolic or genuinely practical. But it worked. You moved in it. You led in it. Oh, and quick side note. Joan charged for her armor later. She kept a tab. Girl knew her worth. And then there's your hair. You've cut it short, cropped like a monk's. This wasn't just a style choice. It's protection. It's function. It's symbolic armor against how the world sees you. You don't just look like a soldier. You are one now. And no one's quite ready for what's coming. So imagine this. You mount a horse, flanked by knights, wind catching your banner. Villagers line the roads, whispering prayers and daring to hope. You're 17. You've never seen war. And yet, as you ride toward Orleans, the city clinging to the edge of English siege, you already feel like legend. Even if the world doesn't know it yet. You arrive outside the walls of Orleans, and honestly, it looks like the world is ending. The city's been under siege for months. Supplies are low. Morale is lower. The English forces have built wooden towers and earthworks all around, choking the city like a noose. Smoke coils from battered rooftops. Church bells toll not for mass, but for fear. And then you show up. You, the peasant girl in armor, the one with God on her side and a banner taller than you are, ride through the gates of Orleans like a thunderclap. Soldiers stop sharpening their swords just to stare. Townsfolk lean from windows. The people whisper your name like it's already scripture. Jehan la Pucelle, Joan the Maid. The French commanders, though, they're not as thrilled. See, while the townspeople are practically throwing flowers at your feet, the war-hardened generals aren't buying the whole. Holy teenager takes command pitch. They'd expected a symbolic figurehead, maybe someone to boost morale, and then keep quiet in a corner. Instead, you start asking tactical questions, studying maps, suggesting maneuvers, and worst of all, you have ideas they hadn't thought of. They tell you to wait. You ignore them. One night, you ride out to the English fortifications just to get a closer look. You stand within arrow range, eyes narrowed at their defenses, and refuse to flinch when an English commander yells from the ramparts that they'll burn you at the stake. You reply, a prayer and a smirk. That night, you sleep soundly. The men around you don't. Now here's the famous moment. A secret letter is sent to the English, signed by you. It demands they surrender or face destruction. It opens with King of England and you, Duke of Bedford, who call yourself Regent of France, surrender to the Maid, sent by God. It's basically the medieval equivalent of this is your only warning. The English laugh. You prepare to prove them wrong. Here's a quirky detail. You insist on being present at every war council, even though the commanders keep trying to sideline you. You also demand that the army go to confession and avoid swearing. That's right. You're launching military operations and banning cussing in the same breath. It's like if Patton also ran a youth Bible camp. And yet, you start winning. You lead the first major assault on the outlying English fort, St. Louis. You wave your banner high, urging the men forward even as arrows whistle around you. Blood splashes the stones, men scream, and yet you keep moving, keep pointing, keep pushing. When the French hesitate, you ride ahead. When they falter, you yell, "Do not retreat. The victory is ours." And by the end of the day, you're right. St. Louis falls. The next day, the French strike again, and again, fort after fort. The English are pushed back. You charge across drawbridges, leap trenches, and once, according to a soldier, you even take an arrow to the shoulder and keep going. You yank it out and climb a ladder into battle like it's a bee sting. Historians still argue whether your influence was military genius, divine intervention, or just an incredible morale boost. But something about your presence changed the game. Even the hardened commanders started following your lead. And the troops, they chant your name when they charge. By May 1429, the siege breaks. Orleans is free. That night, bonfires burn across the city. Bells ring. People cry. You stand in the square, sit on your cheeks, hands shaking, and realize something terrifying. You didn't just survive. You won. And now the real war begins. See, Orleans was a turning point, but your eyes are already on the next goal, Reims, because that's where kings are crowned. And until Charles VII is anointed in Reims Cathedral, The English can still argue he's not truly king. But the road to Reims? It's full of danger. English-held territory, hostile nobles, armies that could cut you down before you even reach the first town. And yet, you march anyway. Before you go, Charles asks for another audience. He looks at you differently now. Not like a curiosity, but like a weapon he never expected to work. He wants to know your thoughts. You tell him, plain as ever, ride to Reims, be crowned, claim what's yours. And then, because being unpredictable is kind of your brand, you ask for something strange. You want to test him. You ask Charles to confess to you privately. Just the two of you, no advisors. And when he does, you tell him what he's been hiding in his heart. Something nobody else knew. Something that proves to him, more than any vision or miracle, that you're for real. Here's the scholarly mystery. We don't know what she told him. Whatever she revealed, Charles never spoke of it again. But from that day forward, he trusted her completely. And that's the moment the world shifts. A king believes in a peasant girl. A girl with no sword, only a banner. And a voice in her head that says, keep going. You're back in the saddle. The sun glints off your armor as you ride from village to village, a strange parade trailing behind. Nobles with plumed helmets, dusty archers, priests with heavy books, and blacksmiths dragging wheeled forges. It's not just an army. It's a movement. And you, at 17, are at the front. But you've got a new quest now, a sword. Not just any sword. You tell your men that a holy blade lies buried behind the altar in the chapel of St. Catherine at Fierbois. You've never seen it, never been there. But your voices were clear. It's waiting. And sure enough, when your men dig behind the altar, past cracked stones and layers of ancient dust, they find it. 5 rusted crosses etched into the blade. Just like you said, the handle is worn, the steel chipped with age. But it gleams in the sunlight like it remembers glory. Here's the kicker. This actually happened. Contemporary records confirm the sword's discovery. Some scholars argue it was a common relic and the whole prophecy. Part was retrofitted later. Others say it was a plant, carefully staged to add to your mystique. But whatever the case, you believe it's sacred. You strap it to your side, even though you never draw it in battle. Instead, it's your banner that slices through the battlefield air. Tall, white, holy, painted with an image of Christ in glory. Angels flanking him like bodyguards. When you ride, it flaps behind you like a divine exclamation mark. At the same time, your clothes are stirring up as much controversy as your weapons. You continue to wear men's armor and clothing, which back then was about as socially acceptable as riding a dragon to mass. But you explain, again and again, that it's for safety, protection, simplicity. One bishop records that you refused to wear dresses even in court because it made you vulnerable, physically and symbolically. And here's the quirky tidbit for this stretch. You also had a tailor on retainer. Seriously, his name was Colin. You paid him to regularly repair and adjust your clothes. The Maid of Orleans was not above a good job. The road to Reims is more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Every mile is filled with risk. Burgundian towns might shut their gates. English troops could ambush you in the woods. Even your own allies whisper about turning back. But you press forward. You stop at Troyes. The city refuses to open its gates. Its officials are terrified of the English, of rebellion, of this armored teenage prophet knocking on their walls like a very polite battering ram. So you do what any divinely appointed general would do. You set up for siege. You order logs, dig trenches, stack artillery. Then something wild happens. The people of Troyes panic. Not from cannonballs, but from you. They've heard the stories. They've heard the victory chants from Orleans. And in a matter of hours, the city opens its gates. No blood, no swords, just fear, faith, and a 17-year-old with a mission. Historians still argue whether it was psychological warfare, divine influence, or just excellent timing. But it works. You walk into Troyes like it was your idea all along. And city after city follows suit. Chalon surrenders, then Reims. By July, you've cut a path through enemy territory without losing a single major battle. You've reversed years of losses in a matter of weeks. Nobles who mocked you are now kissing your ring. Priests who doubted you are writing sermons in your honor. And now it's time. Inside the great cathedral of Reims, stained glass glittering like holy fire, Charles VII stands tall beneath the vaulted ceiling. His robes are crimson. His crown gleams. Bishops chant. Trumpets blare. And you stand at his side. There's a painting that survives from this moment, you, in white armor, holding your banner upright as oil is poured over Charles's forehead. You don't smile. You just watch, because you didn't come for riches or glory. You came to do what the voices asked. And now the king is crowned. But here's the first ripple of unease. The moment the oil dries, Charles starts pulling away. Not obviously, not cruelly, just politically. You feel it like a cold breeze under your armor. His advisors want you quiet, useful but contained. You've gone from essential to inconvenient. A teenage girl who listens to saints is cute when she's winning battles, but dangerous once the king's in power. Still, you're not done. You ride out again, this time toward Paris, the English stronghold, the heart of resistance. You're ready to finish what you started, but something's shifting. Your troops hesitate more. The king delays support. The road that once opened like prophecy now buckles under politics. And yet, you hold your sword close. You raise your banner, and you pray, because you still believe. Paris. Gray towers loom ahead like clenched fists. The Seine coils around its walls, sluggish and dark. You hear church bells, market noises, the distant bark of soldiers, but no cheers. No villagers waving handkerchiefs. No open gates. You've arrived at the most fortified city in France, and it does not want you here. Charles drags his feet the whole way. He delays, sends mixed orders. You suspect his advisors are pushing hard to stop the attack altogether. Why risk his newfound legitimacy? He's crowned now, and Paris is a hornet's nest of English forces, angry Parisians, and thick, murderous stone. Still, you press forward. On September 8th, 1429, you begin the assault. You ride straight toward the Saint-Honoré gate, leading your forces through a hail of crossbow bolts and cannon smoke. You're wearing full armor. Your banner waves high. You scream for courage, for France, for God. And then a thwack. A bolt rips into your thigh. You crumple behind the lines, dragged back by your men as chaos explodes around you. It's your first serious wound, and it burns like fire. But you're more furious than afraid. As they pull you to safety, you beg to be taken back to the front. You shout that you will not leave until Paris is yours. They won't let you. The attack collapses. By nightfall, the order comes down, retreat. Charles calls off the campaign completely. Just like that. Now here's your historical anchor. The attack on Paris was a failure, and it marked the beginning of a long, slow decline in your influence. Though the wound wasn't fatal, it hurt something far deeper. Your momentum. Until then, you'd been untouchable. Miraculous. But now, you've bled. You've lost. And worse, you've been abandoned. Back at court, the mood has shifted. Whispers follow you through the halls. Charles grows distant, polite, evasive. His circle now sees you less as a saint and more as a problem. A useful tool, but too wild. Too unpredictable. Too female. You try to regroup. You propose a new campaign, but the king won't approve it. You ask to continue liberating cities. Ignored. You offer to serve quietly, behind the scenes. Still no. So finally, in frustration, you strike out on your own. You gather a handful of loyal men, including your brother Pierre, and start a rogue campaign in the Loire Valley. You liberate towns, defend civilians, conduct raids. No royal blessing, no official banner. Just you, a few diehards, and a dwindling list of allies. And then Compiègne. It's spring, 1430. You ride to defend the town from Burgundian forces, knowing they're aligned with the English and eager for revenge. You plan a surprise attack, maybe a little too bold. You chase the enemy from the field, but someone closes the city gates behind you. You're cut off, trapped, captured. This, right here, is one of the most hotly debated events in your entire story. Historians still argue whether the gates were closed too early by mistake or on purpose. Some believe Compiègne's governor, Guillaume de Flavy, acted out of fear. Others whisper betrayal. And some say it was divine will. Your mission, after all, had never been to live forever. Whatever the truth, you drag from your horse and hand it over to the Burgundians. They don't kill you on the spot. They know your value. You're a trophy, a bargaining chip, a symbol. And symbols are expensive. For months, you languish in a cell, praying for rescue. Charles never sends it. That's the quirky tidbit here. Despite everything you did for him, Charles VII never offers ransom, never pushes for negotiation. He lets you rot in enemy hands while he consolidates his power and throws feasts and reams. Meanwhile, you're being auctioned off. The English are the highest bidders. They pay 10,000 livres, roughly the price of a high-ranking noble or a medium-sized fortress, to take possession of you. And their goal is clear. They don't want to just imprison you. They want to destroy you. Not just the body, but the myth. Because by now, you're not just a girl in armor. You're a walking miracle, a French icon, a divine rallying cry. And for that, they're going to put you on trial. Not as a prisoner of war, but as a heretic. The cell is cold. Not stone cold, bone cold. Damp air clings to your skin. Your breath visible in the flickering torchlight. Chains bite your ankles. Your hands are shackled. The clothes they gave you after capture are filthy, torn, and not yours. No sword, no banner, no voices, at least not tonight. Welcome to Rouen. The English have brought you here like a prize pig on a festival cart, except instead of flowers and garlands, you're followed by rumors, fear, and the sharp tip of political vengeance. The plan is simple: break you. Not physically. You've already proven you can take wounds and keep moving. But spiritually, publicly, they don't just want you dead. They want the people to see you fall hard. Because you, Joan, are now a threat to more than just the English army. You're a crack in the logic of monarchy. A saint without approval. A woman who dared to lead men. And worst of all, you're popular. That cannot stand. So instead of a battlefield, they drag you into a courtroom. But this isn't Law and Order, medieval edition. This is a religious inquisition staged like a theater production, complete with biased judges, stacked panels, and English paychecks lining the pockets of everyone involved. Over 70 clerics and theologians are called in to question you. You're 19, still wearing chains. Now here's the surprising historical fact. Despite every effort, the trial is a legal disaster. The court violates church law over and over. You're denied legal counsel. You're kept in a military prison instead of an ecclesiastical one. You're interrogated under duress. And yet, you hold your ground. When they ask you why you wore men's clothes, you calmly reply that it was for your safety and modesty. When they ask about your visions, you say they came from God. When they demand proof, you offer victories. You say you hear the voices of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. They ask if they're real. You say, as real as you are. Mic drop. Now for a delightfully bizarre tidbit. The judges obsess over your haircut. Like truly obsessed. They claim short hair is a sign of witchcraft, heresy, and unnatural defiance. Never mind the fact that soldiers wear their hair short all the time. You'd think your military record would be more interesting than your bangs. But here we are. One day they ask you if you're in a state of grace. It's a trap. According to church doctrine, only God can know who's in a state of grace. If you say yes, you're arrogant. If you say no, you're guilty. You pause, and then you say, if I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there. Boom. Even the scribes drop their quills at that one. But clever answers only get you so far. The English are growing impatient. The judges are pressured to speed things up. They want confessions, errors, anything that will justify a conviction. You're worn thin, sleep-deprived, sometimes sick, sometimes alone. And then comes the psychological warfare. They tell you that if you don't submit, you'll be executed, burned, publicly. They show you the stake. You crack. Not completely, but enough. You agree to sign a retraction. saying you were wrong about the voices, that you'll wear women's clothes again, that you submit to the church. You sign. Some say under duress. Others say you don't even understand the document. It's written in legal Latin, and no one reads it to you. They dress you in a woman's gown, strip away your armor, shave your head, and for a moment it's over. But only for a moment. Within days, you return to your old clothing, not as rebellion, at least not entirely, but because, once again, the guards harass you, assault you. The men's clothes are your only line of defense. They shout that you're backsliding, that your soul is at risk. But you say you've spoken with your voices again, that they forgave you, that your mission was never over. And with that, the court moves in for the kill. They charge you with relapse, a death sentence. Scholars still debate whether the whole thing was orchestrated to push you toward this exact trap. The recantation, the guards, the clothes, all bait, all staged. Your enemies knew your spirit would reassert itself, and once it did, they pounced. You're no longer a prisoner. You're a heretic, and the sentence is fire. The morning air in Rouen carries a strange silence, too still for a city alive, too heavy for a city mourning. It's May 30th, 1431. You're 19. You've barely slept, and the guards are already at your door, unlocking chains with the kind of mechanical rhythm that suggests they've done this before. Maybe not to a saint, but still. You don't fight. You don't scream. You pray. They bring you to the marketplace, where a tall wooden stake has been erected on a stone platform. Surrounding it is a sea of faces, soldiers, merchants, monks, children hoisted on shoulders. Some are curious. Some weep. Some cheer. All eyes are on you. You're wearing a simple dress, the same one they forced you into after your so-called relapse. Your head is shaved. Your hands are bound. But your spine, still straight. A priest offers you a crucifix. You take it. You kiss it. And you ask for another to be held high where you can see it. Even now, you're still directing the scene. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Joan of Arc was burned at the stake on charges of heresy, specifically relapse into cross-dressing and false claims of divine guidance. There was no appeal, no royal intervention, no last-minute miracle. Charles VII never lifted a finger. Now comes the fringe tidbit. According to one account, an English soldier watching the execution broke down in tears, reportedly crying out, "We are burning a saint." Some even claim her heart wouldn't burn, that when the flames were done and her body reduced to ash, her heart remained intact, pulsing red amid gray soot. Hard to prove, obviously, but in a way, it doesn't matter. The crowd saw what they saw, and they couldn't unsee it. As flames climb your legs, you shout the name of Jesus over and over. Witnesses record your last word, Jesus. You never recant. You never scream in rage. You never denounce your voices. You die believing. The fire crackles, devours, fades. Then silence. The English rake the ashes. They scatter your remains in the Seine, hoping to erase you. No relics. No martyr bones. Just river water and smoke. But of course they fail. Because your story doesn't end in Rouen. It just goes underground. Here's where things get strange. Over the next few decades, rumors circulate that you escaped, that another woman was burned in your place, that you lived out your days in secret, maybe in a nunnery or a distant village. One woman in Spain even claims to be you, and attracts quite the following before quietly vanishing. Historians still argue about those claims, mostly debunking them, but with just enough mystery to keep things spicy. After all, when a symbol becomes that powerful, people will do anything to keep it alive. 20 years later, Charles VII, yes, that guy, orders an inquiry into your trial. Whether it's guilt or political expediency, he realizes how bad it looks to have let the English burn the woman who basically handed him his crown. In 1456, a retrial is held. You're declared innocent, a martyr, a victim of political and religious manipulation. The court records all 115 witnesses who testify about your visions, your courage, your honesty. One bishop calls your original trial a gross injustice. Another says you were a vessel of God's will. And so your name is cleared, 25 years after your death. It's not exactly satisfying, but it's something. The same church that once condemned you would eventually canonize you. That happened in 1920. Nearly 500 years later, you were declared a saint by Pope Benedict XV. Today, statues of you stand in cathedrals across Europe. Your face has been painted, sculpted, carved, even printed on war bonds and postage stamps. You've been portrayed by Ingrid Bergman, Lily Sobieski, and at least 2 anime characters. Your banner was even carried on a space shuttle. Because of course it was. And here's the scholarly debate that endures. Was Joan truly a mystic, or an extraordinary tactician shaped by her era? Some argue she suffered from undiagnosed mental illness. Others insist she was simply attuned to a form of spirituality we've lost touch with. And still others say it doesn't matter, because belief, when held with fire and conviction, becomes real in its impact. What's certain is this: the girl from Domremy changed the course of history, not with magic, not with armies, but with belief, unshakable, stubborn, armor-clad belief, and a banner waving high. The war rages on without you. After your execution, the 100 Years' War grinds forward like a rusted cart full of swords, loud, messy, and stubbornly pointless. The English continue their campaigns, but something's shifted. Not militarily, morally. A girl in white armor, burned alive in Rouen, haunts them more than any French knight ever did. You become a symbol. At first, quietly, like a whisper passed between widows and farmers, clergy and children. Then louder. Stories ripple across the countryside of the maid who heard saints, who saved cities, who stood fearless before kings and bonfires. You are no longer just a person. You're a legend. Meanwhile, Charles VII, whose royal rump is firmly on the throne thanks to your sacrifices, takes his sweet time reacting. For years, he says nothing publicly about your death. It's politics, of course. France is still half occupied, and he needs to keep peace with powerful factions, including the ones who delivered you to your captors. But silence doesn't stop your story from spreading. Artisans paint you. Poets rhyme about you. Soldiers invoke your name before battle. There's a tale, possibly apocryphal, definitely awesome, of a French company that marched under your white banner after your death, refusing to let fall even as their boots were soaked in mud and blood. Quirky historical footnote: some men try to claim they had been your secret husband after you died, just to score status. That's right, posthumous clout chasers. One guy even forged documents saying you'd lived and married him in obscurity. Spoiler: he was thoroughly debunked and mildly ridiculed by the courts. But it's proof people wanted to own a piece of you. Back in Rouen, English authorities grow uneasy. They notice how quickly public opinion is shifting. Burning a teenage girl who led armies starts to look less like justice and more like state-sponsored PR suicide. Monks begin to murmur. Scholars reconsider. The ink on your condemnation dries, and already it's starting to peel. So Charles finally moves. It's 1,450 to 19 years after your death when he opens a preliminary investigation into your trial. He assigns a new commission. Quietly at first, then more publicly. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's optics. Maybe he's just tired of people shouting, "What about Joan?" at him every time he appears in public. In 1452, Pope Calixtus III gets involved. And in 1455, the full retrial begins. It's called the nullification trial, which, despite sounding like a bad superhero reboot, is actually an attempt to scrub your name clean. Testimonies are gathered from people who knew you personally. Your childhood neighbors, old soldiers, priests, even the scribe who watched you answer your inquisitors with terrifying precision. And here's your historical anchor. Every single witness supports you. Not one calls you a fraud. Not one calls you wicked. They remember you as brave, kind, fierce, guided by something they couldn't quite name. Your old commander, Jean de Metz, says you inspired courage just by showing up. A monk confesses he wept during your trial. Even some of the clergy who once doubted you admit, under oath, that they were wrong. And here's a powerful moment. Your mother, Isabelle Romy, testifies. She's now an old woman, wrapped in widow's black, her voice quivering in the candlelight as she recounts your childhood, how you helped with chores, how you sang in church, how you left home with nothing but faith in your heart and came back in ashes. Her testimony cracks the room in half. On July 7th, 1456, the court declares you innocent of all charges. The original trial is ruled biased, corrupt, and fundamentally flawed. You are posthumously restored to full communion with the Church. Your name is cleared. Too late, of course, but still. Now here's the quirky fringe bit. Some scholars say the retrial was also a subtle PR move for Charles, an attempt to reshape his reign as divinely ordained after a rocky start. But even if it was political, the outcome stuck. You were no longer a heretic. You were Joan of Arc, martyr. Over the centuries, your fame only grows. In the 16th century, Protestants and Catholics both claim you as a symbol of religious purity. Yes, both. In the 18th century, French revolutionaries adopt your image as a figure of peasant power. And in the 19th century, nationalist movements put statues of you in nearly every major French city. You go from condemned heretic to poster girl for patriotism, courage, and faith. And finally, in 1920, nearly 5 centuries after they lit the match, you are declared saint, canonized by Pope Benedict XV. You become Saint Joan of Arc, patron saint of France, of soldiers, of prisoners, of anyone who hears a voice in the dark and decides to follow it. There are now churches named after you, feasts held in your honor, even asteroids and naval ships bearing your name. And still, historians argue, was it faith, mental illness, fierce charisma, divine calling, or was it just you? A teenage girl who believed so deeply that the world couldn't help but believe with you. Let's rewind. Back before the flames, before Reims, before Chinon, before that first audience with Charles, you were just a farm girl in Domremy, a child who liked to spin wool, who helped her father plow fields, who loved the bell at St. Remigius Church, and who heard voices in the quiet. But the world you were born into, anything but quiet. France was a mess. We're talking Game of Thrones meets Civil War with a sprinkle of plague. The 100 Years' War had been dragging on since your great-grandparents were toddlers. The French crown was disputed. The English held vast portions of the north. The Burgundians, technically French, had switched sides and allied with the English after some serious royal family drama. The Dauphin, Charles VII, wasn't even properly crowned. He was king in theory, but in reality, he barely controlled central France. And your home, Domremy, sat right on the edge of this chaos, literally on the fault line between French and Burgundian territory. It was not a calm place to grow up. Raids were common. Farms were burned. Soldiers trampled fields and looted homes. You probably lost friends to the violence. Some accounts say you fled with your family during one of the many attacks. It wasn't the kind of village where dreams usually began, more the kind where they ended. And yet, you began dreaming anyway. At around age 13, you start hearing voices. You say they come with a blaze of light, and you know, without being told, that they're divine, not frightening, not strange, just comforting. First St. Michael, then St. Catherine and St. Margaret. And here's a fascinating fringe detail. These 3 saints were all warrior adjacent. Michael, the archangel with a sword, Catherine, a scholar martyred for outwitting her captors, and Margaret, who supposedly survived being swallowed by a dragon. They weren't gentle shepherds or smiling virgins. They were fighters, just like you were about to become. The voices tell you that France will be saved, that Charles must be crowned, that you are the one to make it happen. Let's pause for a second and appreciate how bananas that must have sounded, even to you. You're a teenage girl who can't read or write, who's never traveled beyond a handful of towns, who probably hasn't even ridden a warhorse yet. And suddenly you're being told that your mission is to restore a broken kingdom. You try to ignore it, for a while, but the voices don't stop. So you go to Vaucouleurs, a nearby stronghold loyal to Charles. You plead with the captain there, a man named Robert de Baudricourt, to take you to the Dauphin. He laughs in your face. You don't give up. You keep coming back, keep insisting, and eventually, a group of villagers takes up your cause. They've seen something in you. Faith, fire, sheer stubbornness, whatever it is, they convince Robert to give you a shot. He sends you to Shinan, disguised as a man, sword on your hip, hair cropped close, 17 years old, riding through enemy territory with a handful of escorts and one goal that sounds completely impossible. And remember, none of this had to happen. You could have stayed home, could have spun wool, married some farmer, lived and died in a village that would never make it onto any map. But you didn't. You listened. You left. You walked toward the noise instead of away from it. Now here's the scholarly debate. Were the voices truly divine or internal? Some think you experienced intense auditory hallucinations, possibly triggered by childhood trauma or temporal lobe epilepsy. Others argue it was a form of spiritual clarity. Rare, yes, but not pathological. And then there are those who shrug and say, does it even matter? You believed, and that belief moved mountains. Because look what followed. You broke a siege that had held for months. You led men into battle and won. You marched the uncrowned king through enemy territory and stood beside him as he became legitimate. You changed the tide of a war that had been drifting for nearly a century. And all of this, mind you, before you turned 20, which is one of the wildest parts of your story. We think of historical figures as old, robed, and wise. But you were a teenager. You joked with soldiers. You cried when you were frustrated. You liked horses. You got annoyed when people misquoted your saints. You had nightmares. You were real, which is why your enemies worked so hard to make you unreal, to flatten your story, strip it of dignity, reduce you to a symbol they could control. But you didn't let them. Even in chains, you spoke truth. Even on trial, you refused to lie. Even at the stake, you looked up and whispered the name of the God who sent you. And even centuries later, when kingdoms have fallen, languages have changed, and the battlefield of France is just a grassy hill, you still ride at the edge of our imagination. Banner raised, eyes forward, voices at your back. You walk through modern history like a ghost in armor. The centuries roll on. Kings rise and fall. Wars flare and fade. Flags change colors. But your story, your short, burning, impossibly loud life, refuses to vanish. It keeps resurfacing, over and over, like a divine boomerang hurled across time. Let's start with the Renaissance. During that period, the French begin to mythologize you in art and poetry. Playwrights script your life into rhyme tragedies. Painters imagine your face, always serene, always glowing, always absurdly blonde, which, for the record, was probably not the case. You were a peasant girl from Lorraine, not a shampoo ad. Still, the idea of you is already outpacing the reality. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and things get weird. Voltaire, Mr. Skepticism himself, writes a satirical play about you called La Pucelle d'Orléans, the Maid of Orleans, which is basically 18th century internet trolling, deeply sarcastic, wildly embellished, and meant to annoy everyone. He mocks your voices, your faith, your gender, even your death. Classy, right? But then a funny thing happens. The French people don't laugh. They bristle. Even after centuries, they still care about you. You're not just folklore. You're part of the soul of France. And that's when you start becoming political. During the French Revolution, both sides try to claim you. The revolutionaries say you were a woman of the people, a rebel against tyranny. The monarchists say you were a loyal servant of the crown, a divine right warrior sent to preserve hierarchy. You're basically the historical equivalent of a political Rorschach test. People see what they want in you. Same goes for the 19th century. Napoleon likes your legend. So do the Romantics, Victor Hugo, Jules Michelet, and a bunch of misty-eyed poets who turn you into a symbol of national pride. Suddenly, statues of you start popping up like crocuses after a hard frost. One of them still stands in place de Pyramids in Paris, golden, defiant, slightly too polished for someone who once scraped mud off her boots on the way to war. Here's a delightful quirky detail. In 1894, a French firm made a chocolate brand named after you. Yes, really. The rappers featured you in full armor, nobly holding a sword, while selling tiny squares of sugar and cocoa. Nothing says battle-tested martyr like a confectionery mascot. And yet, even through the commercialization, your core story holds steady. Which brings us to the 20th century, World War I, specifically. France is devastated. Trenches, gas, an entire generation ground down into the mud. And through it all, soldiers begin writing your name on helmets, trench walls, and letters home. Posters depict you with rifle in hand, urging the people to fight, to endure, to believe. You, Joan of Arc, become the ultimate morale boost. In 1920, just 2 years after the war ends, the church finally makes it official. You are canonized as Saint Joan of Arc. The ceremony is held at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and it's packed. The Pope calls you a holy example. Pilgrims flood the city. Back in France, church bells ring for hours. A peasant girl is now a saint. From that moment on, your story explodes across the globe. Films are made, operas composed. Writers from George Bernard Shaw to Mark Twain tackle your life. Twain, by the way, considered Joan of Arc his best book, better than Tom Sawyer. And that's saying something, considering the man invented frog-jumping contests and painted fences into pyramid schemes. Now, here's a twist you probably didn't expect. In 1945, at the Nuremberg trials, a Nazi defendant tried to invoke your name. He compared the fall of the Third Reich to your execution, painting Germany as a misunderstood martyr like you. The judges were not impressed, but it proves something important. Your legend is powerful enough that even the most cynical people still want to borrow it. Even villains wish they had your conviction. Historians, of course, still debate the fine points. Did you really hear voices? Were they divine? Psychological? Was your military success due to tactics or timing? How much was charisma? How much prophecy? And what exactly made kings, priests, and peasants all stop and listen when you walked into a room? But maybe those questions missed the mark, because your real impact didn't come from answers. It came from your presence. You showed up. Over and over again, you appeared where you had no right to be. In the royal court, on the battlefield, in the courtroom, in the fire. You turned up and you spoke truth. You marched forward when everyone else backed away. You believed, even when believing meant death. And that, more than the armor, more than the voices, is why you endure. You're everywhere now. Classrooms teach your story in every language. Street names, city squares, cathedrals. Your name is carved in marble and etched on plaques. Paintings of you hang in the Louvre, in dusty churches, in bedrooms lit by votive candles. A century ago, people wept at your canonization. Today, people cosplay as you at comic conventions. You've transcended history. You've become myth. But unlike other myths, yours has receipts. Let's take a little tour. In Domremy, your hometown, there's now a basilica built in your honor. It's a mosaic-covered, gold-gleaming marvel set on a hillside, towering over the same fields where you once herded sheep. Tourists come to walk the path you walked, to see the little cottage where you grew up, now preserved behind glass and velvet ropes like a sacred time capsule. Then there's Orleans. Every year, the city throws a massive festival celebrating your liberation of the city in 1429. There are processions, reenactments, fireworks, parades with girls dressed as La Pucelle, riding white horses through the streets. Kids wave flags. Priests give blessings. And every May, someone new dons the armor and banner, chosen not for their nobility, but for their spirit. It's a civic ritual, a national one, a spiritual one. And here's a curious modern fact. Joan of Arc is the only figure in French history claimed as a hero by virtually every major political group, even those diametrically opposed. The right sees you as a defender of tradition and nation. The left sees you as a rebel and folk heroine. Monarchists love your loyalty. Republicans admire your defiance. Secularists respect your resolve. Christians, well, they canonized you. You are, paradoxically, a unifying contradiction. And it keeps getting weirder. In 2016, a French pop singer released a dance track called Gene, featuring synths, laser effects, and lyrics about divine missions and burning bright. It charted modestly. You probably wouldn't have liked the auto-tune. Then there's Japan. Yes, Japan, where you appear as a magical girl in the Fate anime franchise, wielding a flaming sword of divine justice and saving the world between plot twists. The armor's historically inaccurate, but the intensity? Dead on. You've appeared on coins, banknotes, and yes, postage stamps. First in France, then in Canada, then in the US. There's even an asteroid named 835 Joan. You're not just worldwide. You're interplanetary. But here's the tender truth behind the spectacle. People don't remember you for the flash. They remember you for the fire. Not the flames that killed you, but the one inside you. You were young. So many forget that. At 19, most of us are just figuring out our signature coffee order. You were cross-examining bishops in Latin, leading soldiers through sieges, defying the most powerful institutions in the world. And you did it without ever once, ever, claiming it was your own power. You never took credit. Every answer? God sent me. You had no formal education, no military training, no political leverage, just conviction. And that made you dangerous. One of the more haunting details of your story comes not from the trial or the battlefield, but from a scribbled note found in a priest's diary decades later. It reads, "She spoke with the quiet of someone who had already seen the end and walked backward from it." That line has stuck with scholars for generations, because it captures something hard to define. You never acted like someone who thought she might survive. You acted like someone who knew she wouldn't, and did it anyway. That's the legacy. Not just courage, but clarity. A vision so strong, so specific, that even when you were mocked, betrayed, chained, tortured, and burned, you didn't flinch. And now, you belong to the ages, to dreamers who hear whispers no one else can, to outsiders who don't wait for permission, to girls in small towns with big, ridiculous plans, to anyone who knows what it's like to be underestimated, and who decides, quietly, fiercely, that they're going to change the world anyway. You're not just a historical figure anymore. You're a mirror, and every generation sees themselves in your armor. But let's not leave you stuck in statues and stained glass. Let's pull you back down to earth, muddy boots, sweat on your brow, and that stubborn glint in your eyes. Because for all the epic echoes and lofty canonizations, you were never just a symbol. You were a girl in motion. A person who got hungry, cold, tired, frustrated. A teenager who got nosebleeds, whose armor probably didn't fit quite right, who may have been scared more often than she let on. Because here's the truth no monument captures. You lived in your body, that same body you pushed into battle armor, that you trained to sit tall in a saddle for 12 hours straight, that carried wounds, bruises, scars, that trembled under the weight of steel and the weight of prophecy. And, let's just be real, medieval armor wasn't built for comfort, or for women. You had to adapt. Padding here, binding there. Nothing about it was elegant. You probably smelled like horse sweat and iron filings most days. Definitely not the perfume-laced Joan some 19th century painters imagined. Here's a delightfully strange tidbit. You may have worn your armor to bed on campaign, just to be ready for ambush, which probably explains why your enemies couldn't sneak up on you, and why you were likely a walking bruise from neck to knee. But it's also proof. You didn't care about comfort. You cared about mission. And that's what made you magnetic. Soldiers swore by you. Townspeople trusted you. Nobles tolerated you because they couldn't deny the results. Even your enemies respected your resolve, even as they tried to destroy it. They saw something they couldn't explain. They still do. Let's revisit the courtroom again for a second. Not the shouting and judgment, but one particular moment, small and sharp. During your interrogation, a judge demanded you explain why you thought God spoke to you, a nobody from a nowhere village. You answered, "Do you not think God has means to speak to me, too, as well as to others?" Simple, honest, wrecking ball logic. That line echoes through time, because it wasn't just about you. It was about anyone the world tries to silence. Anyone told they're too poor, too young, too strange, too ordinary to matter. You never accepted that. And you never let anyone else believe it, either. That's why, centuries later, your name still lights up like a flare in the dark. Artists don't just paint your battles, they paint your face. Always calm, always serious, like you know something they don't. Even in moments of defeat, you're painted not as broken but bracing. You were never passive, never decorative, never ornamental. You had presence. And that brings us to one of the more unexpected parts of your legacy: feminism. Modern feminist scholars often debate your place in the canon. Were you a proto-feminist? A cautionary tale? A religious exception? You didn't fight for gender equality. You weren't marching with banners or burning corsets, but your very existence cracked the mold. You led men. You advised kings. You made your own decisions. You told powerful men no, and didn't apologize for it. That alone was revolutionary. But you also walked a line: deep faith, strict chastity, obedience to God above all. You didn't rebel just to rebel. You weren't trying to upend the world. You were trying to save it. And that paradox is exactly what keeps your story interesting. Because you weren't a rebellion. You were a response. To injustice. To chaos. To fear. And you met it all with action. People sometimes wonder what you'd be like today. Would you be a soldier? A climate activist? A protest leader? A tech CEO with a Joan GPT startup? Honestly, none of those feel quite right. You'd probably be exactly who you were before. A girl who heard a voice and decided to follow it, even if no one else could hear it. Even if everyone laughed. Even if it led her straight into fire. You wouldn't choose ease, or safety, or applause. You'd choose purpose, and you'd keep walking. Let's zoom back out, past the myths, the memorials, the mosaic basilicas, and look at what really remains. Not relics, not ashes, not even your bones. Just story. The story of a girl in armor, yes, but also a girl who listened. And maybe that's the rarest part of all. Because in a world deafened by noise, the fact that you heard something quiet, something sacred, and actually acted on it, that's revolutionary. You were never just obeying voices. You were interpreting them, filtering them through experience, gut instinct, and the wild trust that somehow, against all logic, you were the right person. And you made other people believe it too. That's the magic trick. When you first arrived at Shinon, they didn't know what to make of you. You were poor. You had no title. You said weird things. And yet, when you spoke, people listened. Guards stood straighter. Pages whispered. A prince took off his crown and listened to a peasant girl tell him who he was supposed to be. You saw things clearly when others couldn't, or wouldn't. That's not just leadership. That's vision. And it's also what got you killed. Because clarity like that makes people uncomfortable. Especially people who profit from confusion. Here's a little-known fringe detail. One of your final letters, written while imprisoned, wasn't to a king or bishop, but to the people of Reims, the same city where you'd helped crown Charles VII. In it, you begged them not to lose heart. You told them to hold fast, to remain loyal to the cause, even if you were gone. You didn't ask them to save you. You asked them to keep going. That's legacy in motion. Meanwhile, back in our time, you've quietly become one of the most searched historical figures on the internet. People ask, was Joan of Arc real? Did she really hear voices? How did she win battles? What happened to her sword? Why was she burned? And every answer leads to another question. That's the kind of mystery you left behind. Not confusion, but a breadcrumb trail of awe. You also have an oddly powerful cinematic record. From the silent film era to Hollywood epics, your life has been portrayed over 40 times on screen. Sometimes they get it right. Stoic resolve, divine mission, tragic end. Sometimes they get it very wrong, like the version where you wear winged eyeliner into battle. Not historically accurate, but at least you looked fierce. But in each one, the same story echoes. Girl hears voice, changes world. That simplicity is part of your myth, and also your genius. Because in reality, you were complicated. You had to be. You made military decisions. You argued with commanders. You negotiated surrenders. You rode through war zones with mud in your teeth and frost in your bones. You weren't just swinging swords and quoting saints. You were doing logistics, morale, PR. You were command. And here's the mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked. Joan of Arc was not just a figurehead. She had actual authority on the field. Troops took her direction seriously. Not as a mascot, not as a lucky charm, as a leader. That wasn't normal. Especially not for a teenager. Especially not for a woman. Historians still debate exactly how much tactical control you had. Some say you advised. Others say you commanded. But no one denies this. When you showed up, things happened. Sieges lifted. Cities rallied. Morale skyrocketed. And when you died, it felt, at least for a moment, like the air went out of the cause. That's the power of presence. It's what your enemies feared most. Not your sword, not your visions, but you alive, walking, speaking, convincing people to believe in something greater than fear. Today, your story is studied in military academies, preached from pulpits, written into plays, sermons, tweets, and TED Talks. You are a case study in courage, in conviction, in what it looks like to walk through fire with your head held high. And you didn't do it for fame. You did it because you couldn't do anything else. The voices called, and you answered. The most startling thing about your story, Joan, is how close it feels. Not ancient, not dusty, not some faded tapestry of a long-lost saint in a glass box. No, you feel immediate, urgent, like if someone cracked open the door of a quiet barn in Domremy right now. They might still hear you praying, whispering, strapping on armor under moonlight, because your life was brief, but it burns hot, like lightning in a bottle. There's a reason so many people feel strangely connected to you. Not just scholars or priests or generals, but people who've never led armies, never heard voices, never touched a sword. People who've simply been told, stay in your lane. Or that's not your place. Or you're not allowed. And you said, watch me. That energy, unstoppable, even the thick of medieval power politics. Your clarity cut through. You didn't care about thrones. You didn't care about fancy robes or the petty rivalries of noblemen. You only cared about what was right, and you pursued it with such terrifying honesty that even your enemies had to pause. Here's a rare little tidbit from the archives. Some of your letters ended with a hand-drawn cross and the phrase, Jesus Maria. But one also had a rough sketch of a sword. Was it a signature? A threat? A joke? A prayer? We'll never know. But it's such a move. The sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a line. You were saying, this is how far I'll go, and no further. You never sought blood. You sought justice. Your sword was symbolic. It pointed the way. And yet, at every stage, you had to defend your right to wield it. Remember how your enemies obsessed over your clothes? How the trial court returned to the topic of pants again and again like it was some divine scandal. They couldn't handle that you didn't fit their box, that you dressed like a soldier, spoke like a prophet, moved like a general. They didn't know what to do with you, so they tried to erase you. But history, messy, stubborn, myth-soaked history, refused to cooperate. And that's why you still stand. You're a paradox. A devout girl of the church, condemned by the church. A national hero who died abandoned by her king. A symbol of humility and courage, and also someone who could confidently say, I was born for this. That line, by the way, comes from one of your trial answers. When asked if you believed you were doing God's will, you said, it was for this that I was born. You didn't hedge. You didn't qualify. You knew. And that certainty, it terrifies people even now. Because we live in a world allergic to certainty. A world of loopholes and disclaimers, hedged bets and backup plans. But you had no plan B. You had God, a vision, a mission. That's it. You left your home, knowing you might never return. You led armies, knowing you might die. You stood in that courtroom, outnumbered and chained, and still corrected your judges when they misquoted church law. And in the end, when the flames licked at your feet, you didn't beg for mercy. You prayed. You forgave. You whispered Jesus one last time. And somehow, that moment didn't end your story. It began it. Because after the smoke cleared and the ashes cooled, people remembered. And they told each other. And the telling never stopped. That's how legends work. Not with trumpets, but with whispers. With mothers telling daughters. With soldiers remembering courage. With doubters clutching belief, like a torch in the dark. That's the legacy you left behind. Not just a story of war, but a story of resolve. Not just about faith, but about follow-through. Not just a girl in armor, but a girl who said yes when everything in the world screamed no. And that's why you still matter. Because somewhere right now, someone's standing at their own impossible edge, trembling, uncertain, scared out of their mind, and they're remembering you, and stepping forward anyway. The wind is soft tonight. It whistles low across the fields of Lorraine, rippling the grass, just like it must have back when you were a child, tugging at your skirt, brushing your cheeks. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear hooves in the distance. Maybe it's just a breeze. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's something more. Because your story hasn't stopped. It just settled, like dust in a chapel, like quiet after thunder. The girl who once paced a field behind her father's plow now resides in paintings and prayers, in documentaries and dreamscapes. And yet, every once in a while, you feel very near. Not in the voices or the miracles or the fire, but in the in-betweens, in the spaces where someone dares to believe. That's the part most people miss. They think your story is about glory, battles won, cities freed, crowns placed. But really, it's about conviction in the face of nothing. You step forward not because success was certain, but because doing nothing felt worse. You risked your life not for victory, but because you believed silence was betrayal. And in that choice between comfort and calling, you became unforgettable. Even now, we return to your image during times of crisis. Your name trends when the world tilts sideways, when war breaks, when injustice rises, when people need a reminder that courage doesn't wear medals or give speeches. Sometimes, it just grips a banner and says, let's go. Here's your quirky fringe legacy fact. You are co-patron saint of radio operators. That's right. In 1922, the Vatican declared that those who send messages through invisible waves might as well ask for your guidance. Why? Because you heard voices across space and time. So now, you're literally the patron of wireless communication. Can you imagine? You, Joan, a 15th century farm girl, now riding shotgun in submarines, satellites, and telecom towers. And here's a scholarly twist to end on. Historians still don't know exactly where your ashes were scattered. The executioners claimed they tossed them in the Seine, but no bones were found. No proof. Just stories. In the late 1800s, a jar surfaced in a church basement, claiming to hold your remains. Analysis later showed it was a mix of ancient mummy powder and cat bones. Fake, but the world wanted it to be true, because people still want a piece of you. Not just to own, but to understand. To hold onto something that says, yes, a single person can matter. That's the lesson. You were not superhuman. You were painfully human. You bled. You failed. You got betrayed by the very people you served. And still you stood. Again and again. Not for glory. Not for vengeance. But because something inside said go. And you listened. And maybe that's what we need now more than ever. Not saints in stained glass, but people who show up. Who hear the quiet, impossible truth in the middle of chaos and act on it. Who walk through fire not to burn, but to light the way. So now we let the armor rest. Let the banners fall, the voices fade, the horses graze quietly in their fields. You've seen enough for one night. From muddy farm roads to war-torn cities. From battle cries to courtroom whispers. From faith to fire to forever. Breathe it out. All that noise. All that weight. Set it down beside you like a sword unclasped at the end of a long ride. You don't have to understand it all. You don't need to memorize the battles, the names, the tangled politics of kings and crowns. You only need to remember that once, a girl with no power, no armor, no permission believed. And in believing, she changed the world. Let that settle. Let that wash through your thoughts like candlelight flickering against stone walls. Soft, steady, nothing to fear. You are safe here. No inquisitors. No war drums. Just the gentle rhythm of your own breath, and the knowledge that even in the darkest places, someone once lit a flame and carried it forward. And so can you. Let the field fade now. Let the torch dim. Let Joan ride into the mist, quiet, golden, fearless, and sleep in the space she cleared for you. You're home now. Close your eyes. Tomorrow will wait.